Well, first, thank you so much for Plan BIM for the invitation. It was amazing. Chile, just amazing. Everything I learned every day a couple of words. So now I've been here for 6 days. I've learned around 11, which is good. I'm hoping to catch another 2. If you can recommend your 2 best words later to me, that'd be great. So I will only need a few years to finish. Not unlike Jennifer. Jennifer is much more better at me in this respect. One important word is baños, which I discovered that I need when I was just walking through Valparaiso, and I couldn't explain myself. With the help of my dear friend Google Translate, I managed to do it. So, today's presentation is about education. I don't know, some of you may know some of the work I do. Just to test, okay, beautiful. Today's presentation is a bit different. I mean, I typically present about different topics, about macro maturity, about maturity and capability of organizations, and only a few presentations I've done over the years about education. And this really gives me a great insight into what's happening here in Chile, because typically education is not prioritized, not put up front. But to see that education is being put up front here in Chile is really a promising thought, and it's really something that makes me feel that what you guys are doing is worth watching, learning from. So today's presentation, I'm going to have 4 parts. The first is the challenges of digital transformation. Some of it was covered by our previous speakers, by Mr. Colombo, by Jennifer, by others, of course, by Carolina. And how different education approaches to deal with these challenges. And I'm going to cover a couple. One of them I'm going to be focusing on is the necessity of establishing something called a BIM Institute or a Center of Excellence, etc. And then I'm just going to widen the discussion a bit to say that we're all doing practically similar things, so why don't we collaborate internationally and just offer a few ideas in this regard. So, just going to give you a little bit of background about my experience in education, which is not much compared to many of you here. I teach at master's level at Middlesex University in the UK and at Hong Kong University in Hong Kong. I helped develop some materials, or the materials for the course at bachelor's level and undergraduate level. And I led an investigation into BIM education in Australia with another 10 colleagues, including Jennifer. And I'm going to be using some of the materials that we discovered. But really, most of what I do is to deliver executive training workshops. So I work mostly with organizations, sometimes with policymakers. So that's really my background with regards to education, learning, and as such. So I'm going to bore you with a definition about building information modeling, which is very similar to what dear Carolina had said. And building information modeling is a term that we have to use now so that we focus attention, okay? There's 2 definitions I would like to introduce you to. One is that building information modeling is a set of technologies, processes, and policies, or you can call them methodologies or standards, which enable multiple stakeholders. It's not about one company, one type of company only. It's about multiple stakeholders to collaborate in designing, construction, and operating a facility. And a facility could be anything. It could be a building, of course, could be a bridge, could be an infrastructure project. Now, this is if you want, the research-based definition, which you'll find in literature. But there is another definition which I use now more often, which I call it a pragmatic definition, which is that building information modeling is just the current expression of innovation. Meaning BIM will go. One day you will wake up in the morning and you will hear on the news, BIM is dead. There's another term. And so really the term is not that important. It's more about digitization or digitalization. It's about transformation. So but currently BIM is the expression of innovation. So really when we're discussing BIM, we are discussing innovation, transformation. So don't focus too much on what we consider BIM tools, software, etc. No, it's much wider than that. So, what are the challenges facing our industry with regards to digital transformation? There's many things. One is that the speed of change. Yeah, I'm sure all of you, you hear about new tools, new network solutions, etc., on a nearly daily basis. The change pace is just breathtaking. Things are changing so fast, and the speed is increasing as well. So that's a really big challenge for educators and for companies as well. The second thing is that we talked a lot about globalization previously, in the previous years, but really only in the past couple of years we've seen this really happen. We've seen large organizations becoming dispersed and using teams all over the world. You will find a project being done at the same time with a group of people in the UK, and another would be in Singapore, and maybe some support coming out of India or Vietnam, all at the same time. And it's becoming increasingly the status quo. And many companies in Australia, and I'm sure all around the world, are using these approaches to cut costs at the same time, to be able to have a global reach. So it's becoming challenging how to manage all these teams in design, construction, and operation as well. And increased standardization. So also there's lots of standards coming through. The UK has produced on its own, I don't know how many standards. And there's so many standards. This is not working properly. So many standards are appearing every day, and you've heard, of course, about PAS 1192. You probably heard about what ISO are developing. If you ever visited China in the past, I don't know, a few months, you have learned about the efforts of the standardization, what the EU are doing. So many standards are coming through. And this is actually quite a big relief in one way, and it's also quite a big challenge, because the more standards there are, the more contradictions there are between these standards. And if you are a global company, and even a local company, trying to figure out what to do, you'll find all these things complicate the picture for you. And makes it more difficult. Some things become easier because it has been standardized, but when you see competing standards, it makes it a little bit more challenging. Other challenges is about how roles are changing. Roles are changing also quite significantly, depending where you are in the world, and depending on many factors. So some of these changes are also causing lots of stress when it comes to education and learning. So one example would be is that some roles are really being affected so much by digitization. So roles are changing. I work with lots of engineers, and the separation between what used to be called a draft person and a draftman, a draftwoman, and a designer, is the line between them is really blurring, and the line between an architecture designer, like a graduate, and an architectural technologist, for example, in the UK, is also blurring. So things are becoming a little bit more mixed, because a designer is now able to design, of course, and able to generate documentation without the need for a draftsperson. And a very experienced draftsperson is able to use simulation tools that will really do some of the design work, which was typically done by more specialized engineer. There are new roles. You've heard the term BIM manager, model coordinator, information manager, project BIM manager, whatever. All these roles are appearing and across the world, and these are new roles which need some attention. They are carving their own space within our industry, and we need to, and these are causing also some challenges for education. Is an information manager a separate discipline, or is it a set of responsibilities to be added to current roles? And I'm sure Carolina Briones will be discussing this in more detail later on. And actually, some of the roles are challenged by the advent of artificial intelligence and big data. And I'm just gonna discuss just one thing I read a couple of weeks back. And actually, something's happening in the US, and now it's happening in Australia with big companies which we haven't heard of before 3-4 years back, like WeWork, uses data to design buildings. So really, the human designer has a role to play there, but they're using data to optimize the interiors of a building. But now we've learned that next, so now you're buying existing buildings and they're just remodeling them, but now they're going to build new buildings, and they're going to use their data scientists to design these buildings. And only a few weeks back, I read that Alphabet, Google, Apple, which is misspelled, of course, and Facebook are also going to enter into the real estate business, and they're going to use big data to design not only buildings and precincts and possibly small cities. Google announced that Alphabet, which is the the mothership of Google, they're going to build their own small city to test every technology possible known to us now and new technologies. So this is causing also some challenges. How these big giants entering the design and construction and real estate and causing some disruption, at least for the time being in the US and Australia and UK, and I'm sure later on across the world. And something which is very, very interesting, worth watching, is that opposite to our intuitive understanding of what technology does, it seems that if done properly, technology reduces the need for specialty. We thought that as technology comes in, we need to be more specialized. In some instances, we discovered that it's the opposite, where the use of virtual reality and, if you put on glasses or, any of the commercial products for augmented reality, it allows someone who is trained generically, meaning has some basic skills about a trade, to be aided by augmented reality to do a much more specialized tasks. So we've seen companies like BAM in Europe using this in operations or testing this in operations. Other companies using this to help someone who is just trained for a few weeks. They give them a goggle, they connect them to a software, and they send them up into a building and says, go and lay the walls, the dry walls in that building. And using that technology, an untrained drywall operator will be able to put these walls much faster than someone who is trained without using the goggle. So this gives us an indication of the challenges needed and how we need to rethink some of the things when we're discussing training and education. So many challenges, really. And the currently educational programs or educational approaches to deal with these challenges have been really centered around a few ways of doing it. One is, this is just the most typical ones if you want. One is, these are challenges of education, is that, and this is already mentioned by Jennifer, so I'm not going to dwell on it too much, but the idea is that we still teach each discipline in a silo, like separately, while work using digital technology is all about collaboration. And this is actually some of the things which are very critical to moving industry forward is the need for competent educators. So okay, we've got the standards, we've got the processes, we've got the tools, we've got all these lessons learned from big organizations, and we need now to teach future practitioners. But who's going to teach them if the educators don't have much experience? They've been in the trade for a long time, they have lots of experience in teaching, but this digital transformation has been too fast for them. And we all struggle with this digital transformation. And educators, with their load of work they need to do, find it very difficult as well. And as you know, the slow pace of change. When you want to change a program in a university, like at undergraduate level, it could take you up to 5 years. 5 years in our industry with this digital transformation is just it's an impossible pace. It's just useless. By the time you bring in something new into a program, and you've went through the accreditation cycle, like in Australia and the UK and many countries, you have to be accredited, as Jennifer has mentioned. It's too late. Things have changed. The process that was considered to be a best approach has become redundant, okay, or becoming redundant. So by the time you want to change it, you need another 5 years, while the pace of change has even sped more. And so there's something wrong in this formula, that education needs to, trying to keep up with this. So really, it just, this fact alone is a huge challenge that we really need to think through. Okay, so typical approaches that we were discussing is, one is what typically educators try to do, or educational policy tries to do is, one, let's try to add BIM or inject BIM into current programs. So we have a really good program with good attendance. We have a successful program, but BIM has come, and now we need to introduce it into the curriculum. And they do it in a, let's say in a thoughtful way, but they inject it into the program. Sometimes this is the only solution. I'm not saying it's not a solution. Sometimes the only solution to do it when you add BIM, you remove something, but you add BIM into it. But that's really one of typical approaches. It doesn't always work. The second is developing new postgraduate programs, which is one of the easiest solutions to do. And we find in the past, 3 years, tens, if not hundreds, of master's programs just appearing all over the world. And I'm assuming you will start to see this here if you haven't already started to see this here. This is a good way to deal with the immediate challenge of digital transformation, but it is definitely on its own not enough. Other countries find also a great number of people trying to sell you certification programs, or to convince you that your degree as an architect or as an engineer is not worth much anymore until you pay for and sit for their exams, or you get their certification that you are a BIM-enabled professional, or whatever they call it. So this is the type of way the industry is reacting to all this digital transformation. The industry is not able to keep up with this, and all these things are coming into play. In some countries, like in the UK, you've got, just to mention a few, you've got BRE, I don't know, you've heard the term, the name, RICS, RICS, you've got Lloyds, you've got, I don't know, there's another 3 or 4 I forgot, and of course British Standards Institute also providing certification in BIM. So this is the way the market is reacting to these changes and trying to educate the industry. Again, some of these things are necessary, but not enough. Maybe we should look at them more into as a whole, rather than saying this is the first one is a solution, or the second is a solution, or the third is a solution. And if we want to look at them all three together, how do we coordinate them? And this is where the need for actually a more comprehensive approach, saying that we really need some kind of a framework, an educational framework. We need some kind of an institute. We need some kind of a center of excellence to coordinate education so that it can deal with this digital transformation. Only a few countries have managed to develop something like this so far. One good example would be in Singapore. Another which is starting to emerge in the Quebec in Canada, but still there are few and far between. And this is a kind of recommendation which I think every policymaker needs to look at, how to coordinate the delivery of education so it meets digital transformation. I mean, if we pause time, if we say, okay, we know what BIM is and the challenges of BIM, and now we want to respond to it with new undergraduate degrees or to new courses or new postgraduate courses or CPT programs. But the whole premise is wrong. You cannot pause it. So by the time you do it, things have changed. So it needs to be a little bit more dynamic. That's why the need to think through it a little bit more intently. Now, beyond the Developing Education Institute, which I'm going to cover a little bit in more detail in a second, is that all countries are facing the same challenges. And of course, we all use different languages, different dialects even, but we all say you're facing the same challenges. We have our peculiarities in each market, but since we're all facing the same educational challenges, why not try to learn from each other? Why not try to establish some kind of a learning framework for all of us to benefit from, to share experience with each other? So I'm going to just cover this in what's left of time, these two. The need for a countrywide education institute. You can call it a center of excellence, a collaboration lab, because these names appear. You know, if you're a researcher and you try to find a discussion about these topics, you'll find them under different headings. And I'm going to share an experience with you with the research we've done in Australia in 2012. And this is available online for you later to read. And out of this study, which is done by the Australian Institute of Architects and Consult Australia, there were 20 principles, if you want, published and clarify where we think the issue is and how things should be progressing. I'm going to cover some of them, not all of them. The first one is actually one of the most important one, is that BIM education is the shared responsibility of academia and industry. We cannot really ask academia on its own to take care of this, okay? It's just impossible. The challenge is too great. And of course, we cannot ask industry on its own to take care of this. We have to look at current practitioners, future practitioners, tradespeople, all of them. And even in some countries, like I was in Dublin a few weeks back, and they said, okay, what is the approach for the man in a van? The man who drives a white van and goes and fixes the plumbing issue at home. So they need also something for them as well. And this, based on research we've done, macro adoption research, we found also the same thing. We found that there's 8 main things when you're doing adoption in a country. 8 things must exist. You need to have clear objectives. You need to have champions and drivers, like you have Plan BIM here. You need to have a regulatory framework. You need to have some guides, publications and standards, etc. Learning and education. You need to have measurement and benchmarks, standardized deliverables like objects and inventories or processes, and of course you need to have some technology infrastructure like access to software and hardware and networks. So one of the main ones is learning and education. So unless in a country they don't have a framework, an approach to learning and education, then something is missing from the adoption picture. You cannot really move BIM adoption in a country at a macro level without having a very strong approach in education. We also assess this from different perspective. And we analyze different players within an industry. And we discovered there's 9 main players which really have a role to play, whether to lead something or to support others. And one of the main players, of course, is educational institutions. Now, so if you look here closely, I know the text is a bit small, you'll find that there's education institutions, there's policy makers here, there is the organizations, and there's the individual player. So there's a responsibility for the individual. And of course, there's responsibility upon the technology developers, the Autodesks and Imagechecks of the world and their resellers, and on building smart, and on communities of practice like BIM Forum Chile, and on associations like Associations of Architects and Engineers. So really, it's a shared responsibility. So when we're discussing BIM adoption diffusion within a country, it's not the responsibility of only Plan BIM. That's, of course, you always need a driver, you need someone to help provide the roadmap, but it is a shared responsibility, and education institutions have a very, very important role to play. A shared responsibility. This is something, if you take only one message out of this, of my presentation, it is that this shared responsibility. We all have a role to play. Another principle is that when we're discussing BIM education, it is not the same thing for all people. So for some, it's just awareness. So what is BIM, what is not BIM, what is the difference between BIM and CAD? And for others, it's more about scripting and simulations and using data to generate new facades, and etc., etc. So really, when discussing BIM education, we're discussing a whole spectrum of topics. So we have to keep this in mind. So we're not only discussing education or how to, design using a specific software. No, it could be about the value of early involvement of contractors and the benefits of having them join the modeling environment early on. Another principle would be that education must be made available to all those who need it in formats which are mindful of their disciplines, specialties, roles, education, and experience levels. Meaning, it's a very long sentence, but the idea is we cannot deliver BIM education to all people in the same way. That wouldn't work, okay? Not because of individual learning styles, that's of course a given, but because each discipline has a history of ways of learning things. Some people would learn through concepts, so others learn on the job, others learn in the office, on site or in the office. So we have to take care of delivering education in all these contexts for all these different disciplines. Another one is, and also important one, and I'm hoping that all of them you will see as important, that we have to treat education as, because it's a shared responsibility, that we are all of us individually are both learners and learning providers. Okay? So I'm a learner at one point, but I must be treated as a potential learning provider, and thus enabling each learner to become a learning provider. Why is this important? Meaning, even if every university in Chile, every university in the world, every association in the world, they do their best, they dedicate all their time, 50 hours a week, teaching people, it will not be enough because of digital transformation, because of complexity. So we have to build the capability of people to be able to become teachers. So, and this is, there's a big responsibility on organizations to do that, to train their trainers and to spread the knowledge. So this what's called the learning triangle, the relationship between the learner, the learning spectrum, all the topics that need to be learned, and the learning providers, and it goes in circles. Now look at number 16 and number 19 is the importance of having what's called a collaborative CPD program, or continual professional development program at associations. Now the importance of this will vary from one country to another depending on the role the associations play. The role in Chile could be a bit different than it is in Australia, as it's definitely different than it is in Spain. But there's a need for an academic framework that combines all this. And so it needs to be informed by research, of course, meaning everything we do needs to be informed by research. And in order to develop and deliver the right education to each of these learners and help them to become learning providers. This will need a full day to discuss, so I'm not going to do that just for your sake. I'm going to end by principle number 20, coming as a recommendation out of that report, is that there is a need to establish a well-structured and well-funded BIM institution. You can call it whatever you like. And it's essential to facilitate development and delivery of collaborative education across the construction industry. So we need something. Why do we need this something? It's because typically, I don't know, it may be a little bit different in Chile than it is in other countries, there's a bit of a separation between the way people learn in industry and the way they are taught in academia. I don't know how many times you've heard of, oh, we've received these students from that university, but we had to tell them, forget everything you learned about BIM or about digital transformation or about technology or about processes, and let me teach you again. And this is a typical situation. So we need something that really sits in the middle between academia and industry. Something that will share the experience, will identify the topics that need to be learned and how they need to be delivered, and maybe facilitate the delivery of sharing experience or to conduct research and solving problems. There's a few examples of this around the world where researchers are embedded within industry for a certain period of time, and of course industry people are invited into universities, which in some countries is a typical scenario, but not in all. But having someone in the middle, some kind of organizational structure to help this exchange of expertise will speed up that sharing process. And finally, part 4 is that since we're having very similar challenges in so many countries, and it's been I've been in this thing for a long time. Most of the problems are common. You may think that the problems facing Chile are very particular to Chile. And if you analyze them closely, you will find that most of them are very, very common. They will be most common, of course, with countries that you share cultural heritage, a little bit more different with other countries. But typically, the main problems are common. So if their main problems are common, then really, if the common problems, then we need the common solutions. These solutions which maybe help these different institutions around the world or help these different universities around the world to deliver a BIM education in an efficient way. It's a global challenge, so we need global efforts. So it's very important to have a very strong local approach to BIM education, but it's definitely not enough. There's so much to be learned from other approaches to BIM education, to learning, to professional development, to self-learning. So we need a global effort. So it is important to support international efforts, example, Building Smart, international, and to adopt applicable international standard of organizations documentation. I'm curious, how many of you have heard of Building Smart? Okay, so that's probably 20%, maybe? Okay. And this is a typical answer. I mean, this is unless you're in Scandinavia or now in the UK, awareness of these things are high. But in many countries, there's no awareness of what these people are doing and what types of standards coming your way. So it's also important to enable the wider community to contribute. Now, the issue we face in Australia, for example, or in other countries, that the BIM adoption issue is, you can use any word you like. You can say hijacked, you can say made the personal approach of, you can say led by, you can say championed by, whatever. But we must always be careful not to consider BIM adoption as the responsibility of the few, or no one else should enter this game. No one else should be able to contribute. We should always try to find ways to engage with the community in order to develop new solutions for digital transformation. That's because we are all responsible for this. It's a shared responsibility. So we really need to engage with the community. And having communities of practice like BIM Forum Chile, and I'm assuming there will be others in the future, is very, very important. For me and the group, Okay? I have this effect on technology, so I'm not surprised at all. So just a quick introduction to the initiative. So what is an initiative? Okay, so we're trying to say, we said that there's a need for an institute, and there's so many institutes around the world, and we need to help them, and we need to connect them. So okay, that's all good and nice, you know, but how do you do it? I mean, how do you help, you know, policymakers and help education institutions? So really, we sat down or stood up, I don't remember, and we tried to think about a way to help all these, you know, good efforts. So we formed something called the BIM Excellence Initiative, or the BIM-E Initiative. The BIM-E Initiative is an international, not-for-profit, community-based effort. So it's not led top-down. It's a community of people trying to help the industry. And this is very important. Anyone can help our industry. Don't say I'm just a draftsperson. I'm just an architect working on small houses, or don't ever belittle what you can do to improve the industry. And very important that we all engage in moving this forward. Smile. Okay. So this stops working. Okay. So launched in the BIM initiative started officially in March 2017. Well, there was an attempt earlier in 2010, but it failed because it was too early. Nobody wanted to listen. Hopefully now people will listen. We have this community of people. Okay, so it's certain principles. We said, if we want to help others, we have to be committed to openness. Okay, a real openness. We want to be open about what we're doing, what we're delivering. When we provide material, we want to provide them with the right license, open license for people to use. You need to develop things around something structured. We don't want to develop things that overlap. This is a problem with so many things happening in our industry. You will find a BIM guide in Australia. I'll give you an example. You will have guides or strategies or roadmaps, like 5 or 6 of them that are all the same. The difference would be the logo of the people, you know, put on the front. It's a bit different in colors. Sometimes, if you're lucky, differences in the fonts they use. But it's the same thing. There's lots of overlaps. So we need a structure so when you're developing something, you're building something, you can make them complementary and you can grow things. And it must be peer-sourced and peer-tested. What's peer-sourced? You've probably heard of crowdsourcing. Okay, now there's a bit of a difference. We select the people who contribute based on their specialty. So it could be someone working in a company who has really experience in drones in BIM, okay, using drones in BIM. So we'll select that. We consider them to be a subject matter expert. It could be a researcher in a certain topic, etc. And these are the people who are developing the materials I'm going to show you a couple of samples of. And it's about open innovation across boundaries. So when we start and when we finish, we think about helping the whole of industry in all countries. This is not a country-specific thing. We have to use English as a base, but that's the only thing. The rest, we're hoping that it will be international from day one. And then asking people, providing them with help so that they can customize it for their own countries, for their own regions. So this is our current network of members. We've got, I don't know, 12 from across the world. You can see the handsome guy here. You've got Eduardo from nearby Brazil. Noah from the UK. Susan from Canada. She's from Building Smart. She's involved in ISO. Same with Mazia. She's from Italy. She's also involved in standards. Victor was in Chile a few weeks back. I don't know what he was doing here. Maybe no, learning Spanish. No, he's Spanish, so. No, he's involved in Lean BIM. He's our go-to guy for anything Lean and BIM, and he's helping now develop an infrastructure guide, BIM, in Catalonia. Then Zetiment and Julie and Mohammed from Northumbria. He's the lead person on macro adoption. So all the work we do in macro adoption. And we have, this is our knowledge structure. You notice the same color. You know, it's very clever of me. That's very difficult to translate jokes, correct? Okay. So anyway, there's another structure we use in order to build things. So we have like a foundations of concepts, and then we've got something called blocks. I'm going to show you a couple what we mean by blocks. Then we've got tools. We use the blocks to build, and we have workflows, and we have views of everything. Okay, so what are these? Because I only have 5 minutes left. So I'll give you an example. The BIM initiative is defining all common BIM terms. 700 plus dictionary items are now available, are being translated into multiple languages. So I've got already common terminology in English and now being translated fully into Arabic and Czech, and now partially into German and Catalan and Spanish and Russian and Chinese, and I don't remember the rest. Okay? Then we've got, we're organizing and developing thousands of competency items. Competency items is kind of way of saying what you need to learn, or the activity you need to do, or an outcome of something. So for example, the ability to conduct clash detection using federated models. Translate that. Because we had a chat with our really excellent translators, but I didn't tell them everything. So I'm going to show you a couple of resources. Then when you want to define requirements and deliverables, it's always a struggle. So we said, okay, how do you help people to define deliverables? So we developed and researched something called information users, or BIM users, or model users. And we're combining all of them into learning and assessment and performance improvement modules over time. So all this is done by volunteers, so sometimes we want to move faster than we can. So just quickly give you an indication of the dictionary, which has all these features, and I'm going to do a magic trick now. Okay, I'm going to use this to click on this one. Come on. Okay, that's it. Okay, bimdictionary.com. We have lots of, we've got 713 terms at the moment. If you scroll down a bit, you'll find, for example, this in English. I'm going to use this to press on Spanish. Yeah, no, to the left. Yes, beautiful. All right, that's in Spanish from Spain. You may have Chilean Spanish, maybe better, I know, but okay. If we scroll a little bit up, if you don't mind, up, right, down. No, I mean up. It's okay. Anyway, there's a way to isolate all Spanish terms. There's 100 terms already in Spanish, so you can later have a look. And if you don't mind, we can go back to the presentation now. Gracias. Okay, thanks. And this is the dictionary. Now we have something called competency hierarchy, and then we have something called competency inventory, and we have a competency list. And I'm not going to cover this in any detail because Carolina will cover the same topic, same type of effort developed by Plan BIM, which is very, very important. And then we end up with something called information uses. So really, when you are using information in a project, you are either using it as models or as documents or as just data sets. So we're trying to define ways of providing words for people, providing terms for people to define what they want. So I'll give you an example. This is very small. Wouldn't be maybe much time to show you here, but for example, clash detection or space programming would be one. Cost estimation would be another. A third would be, light analysis would be another. So you can use these terms in your documentation, and these are of course linked to the dictionary. They're defined in the dictionary. Over time, we'll be also linking them to competency items. So when you're developing a documentation, a client says, I want you to do a cost estimation. It will load up lots of capabilities into the online system, or we'll open the dictionary. We'll do all these fancy stuff later on. So that's it. And a quick summary. There's lots of challenges caused by digital transformation. I think we can all agree it's really challenging. We said we said there's so many educational approaches to dealing with these challenges. Definitely we will not agree what's the best approach. That we don't have to agree. But what we know is there's so many ways of dealing with these challenges. I would recommend a comprehensive approach to education rather than what's called a piecemeal, like a small pieces. Let's do an undergraduate, test it for 3 years, then do another postgraduate, test it for another 3 years, and then maybe do a CPT program, like in an association. That's too little and too slow. You need a more comprehensive approach, and I would recommend learning from other educational networks. Provide you with a few bedtime reading. If you're ever bored, there's nothing on Netflix, so you can enjoy this. It's as exciting. I've used really good font, so. And then a call for open collaboration. So really we can learn from each other, learn what you're doing, what PlanDim is doing, what other education institutions are doing, and also try to share with you what others are doing. And that's it. Thank you.
Plan BIM, una iniciativa del Comité de Transformación Digital de Corfo.